Hello. Anybody with even a passing knowledge of astronomy will be able to tell you about the 8 planets of our solar system. All the way from Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. And I'm now going to tell you about 7 out of those 20 planets. Our first non-existent planet, our first of those mysterious 20 I mentioned, is Pluto. Now, many people still have a romantic notion that Pluto is a planet, and it's tucked out there way beyond Neptune. But Pluto is a tiny little object. Compared to our planets, minuscule. But we've discovered Makemake and Eris and Sedna and a whole load of other things, and Pluto is just one of a great many objects out there. Now, we don't want to call them all planets. For the sake of sanity, I'm afraid it was demoted to 2nd division. Pluto is a dwarf planet. Now, obviously, Pluto is still there out beyond Neptune. It hasn't stopped existing. We just stopped regarding it as a planet. And that's exactly what happened to the second of our non-planets, Ceres. The planets of the solar system, Mercury, Venus, Earth and Mars, and then a big gap to Jupiter. Now, there is this idea of the Titus-Bode law, and it spotted there was a pattern where the planets were. Now, it turns out it's just a coincidence. But because of that pattern, a lot of people were convinced there had to be another planet lying between Mars and Jupiter. And in 1801, Giuseppe Piazzi, an Italian astronomer, discovers an object lying between Mars and Jupiter. And, as is the way with planets, it is named after a god. It is named Ceres for the god of agriculture, and is added to the list. A group of astronomers who were given a name, the Celestial Police, in the early 19th century were looking for this mysterious planet. And they didn't stop when they found Ceres, they carried on looking. And a year later they discovered Pallas, and they discovered Juno, and they discovered Vesta, and rapidly the number of objects dotting around between Mars and Jupiter grows and grows and grows. And just as with Pluto, we decide we cannot call them all planets, so they become known as the asteroids. Ceres is still there, not a planet, but the largest of the asteroids and the nearest of the dwarf planets. So there was no planet to be found in that position. Heinrich Olbers suggested that maybe there had been a planet there in the past. And maybe that planet had wandered too close to Jupiter. And Jupiter's gravity had torn the planet apart. And what we were seeing as the asteroids were the remnants of that ancient planet. And the planet was given the name Phaeton from mythology. And in mythology, Phaeton is the son of Helios. And he steals Helios' chariot and drives the sun across the sky for a day with chaotic results, until Zeus, who is the Greek version of Jupiter, is forced to take action and destroys Phaeton. Now, nowadays we know that even if we were to take all the asteroids and put them together, they barely come to a fraction of the size of the moon in total. There just is not enough material there to make a planet. So I'm afraid Phaeton was never a planet and must go back into the box of mythology. So it was suggested that Phaeton had been destroyed, but we now know that couldn't be the case. But other planets have been destroyed in the past. Our Earth is quite unusual because our moon is so large compared to the Earth. Now, we have good evidence to believe that some 4.5 billion years ago, in the early solar system, there were more planets. And an object probably about the size of Mars has come barreling in towards the Earth, ripping away the crust of the Earth, blasting it into space. And that debris has then turned into an orbiting body that we now know as the Moon. and is slowly drifting away, even to this day, still drifting away. And we give that hypothetical planet the name Theia. Lovely name from mythology again, because in mythology, Theia was the mother of Selene, who is the goddess of the moon. The planets around our solar system are in stable orbits, but not every planet has to be in a stable orbit. Theia was a perfect example of a planet that was not in a stable orbit. It drifted, stretching its path across the solar system until it comes crashing into the early Earth. There are other planets that have been suggested in the past. One of them is the CounterEarth. And this is a wonderful idea. The idea is that we have the Earth in a steady orbit around the Sun. And exactly opposite, on the far side of the Sun, is another planet, perpetually hidden from our view. Now, we do know now that can't be the case, because if it was there, an object that large, it would be unstable. And we or the Earth would be thrown out of position and we would detect it. Even if it wasn't detected from being thrown out of position, we would detect it because it would move the other planets, it would move our spacecraft. So I'm afraid the CounterEarth is also back in the box of mythology. While we're talking about gravity, let's talk about planets that do exist. Let's talk about the planet Uranus. Discovered by William Herschel, and people were able to watch its position, but they fairly soon noticed it wasn't quite where they expected to be. It was slightly out of position. Now, a French mathematician, Urbain Le Verrier, uses the laws of gravity, and he is able to work out that there may be another planet out there somewhere, tugging it slightly out of position. And he is able to predict exactly where the planet Neptune will be found. Inspired by the success of discovering Neptune, other astronomers turn their attention to looking at the inner solar system and looking at Mercury, because Mercury was also not quite where it was expected to be. So they take the same principle and they suggest that there may be another planet lying between the Sun and Mercury. And they give this planet the name Vulcan, for the god of volcanoes. And it is imagined that this planet hugs extremely close to the Sun. It is barely more than 10 degrees away from the Sun at any time. Seeing this planet would be almost impossible. The only way people could see this planet is to watch as it crosses the disk of the Sun, or possibly to observe it in the middle of a total solar eclipse. So to hunt for Vulcan, the best opportunity was to look during a total solar eclipse. And in 1919, a total solar eclipse was observed. This telescope was one of those used to observe that eclipse, and the results are conclusive, but not for the existence of Vulcan. This telescope was used to prove Einstein's theory of relativity. And with Einstein's theory of relativity, there is a subtle change to the way that gravity works. And all those little errors in Mercury's position that people used as evidence for the existence of Vulcan disappear. And with the disappearance of that evidence, Vulcan also disappears. Einstein killed Vulcan. We are still using the same principle that Le Verrier used to discover Neptune to look for more planets. Beyond Neptune lie the Kuiper belt objects, Pluto, Eris, Haumea, Makemake, all of those objects. And we can look at the orbits of those. And if those orbits are not quite where we expect, if there are unusual patterns, then maybe it indicates there is another planet somewhere out there, planet X. And astronomers have done this, and the evidence is thin, but there is some evidence that somewhere deep out in the depths of space, far, far beyond the orbit of Neptune is another planet, perhaps 10 times the size of the Earth. Maybe so far out that it never approaches within even 100 billion kilometers of the Sun. But it could be out there. And beyond Planet X, there may be other planets out there. When the planets of the solar system passed one another in the early solar system, sometimes their gravity could chaotically throw a planet, and it would be thrown way out. Planet X, lying 100 billion kilometers out from the Sun, may well be a victim of such a collision. It is also possible that when planets pass one another, they could be thrown with even greater force. It is perfectly possible there are planets out there between the stars, planets that once used to orbit a star like our Sun, and they have been thrown out, and now they are travelling detached from their parent stars, frozen cold and drifting between the stars themselves, rogue planets. We may well have had a great many more planets in the past than we currently do. Some we know about, some may be lost out in the depths. So, when an astronomer tells you about the 8 planets of our solar system, they're perfectly correct, with a few caveats. It is 8 known planets. There may be others. It's perfectly correct now. There were others in the past that we've changed our categorization on. There were others that we've imagined. And there are others that we may have lost. There are a lot of non-planets that have been, and some that never were.